Yes, Black Lives Matter. We cannot just dismiss this as something that may be happening only in the US or, just the white world where obviously there's a whole multitude of black people as well there. We cannot dismiss it as a reality of the West only. I think we need to really see how there is a universal context within which racism has operated, and how we need to really address that whole question in a sensitive way, and how we need to basically look at the universal context within which racism has incipiently and overtly entered over centuries. It's been there, and of course there are historical and political reasons as to how it happened and why it happened, and why have we got into a situation where there's white supremacy. To my mind now, two things are happening in my mind actually, because this is something to do with a book that I edited along with Vandana Singh, and this is a book of short stories which Niyogi publishers, Niyogi Books, they published it. And this is that book, in fact, which is a book which is very beautifully produced, by the way, by Niyogi. But what it contains is some very, very, very sensitive short stories to the kind of society there was. And this is pertaining to 1960s in Kenya. This is East Africa. And the writer Joginder Paul, who happened to be at that time living there because he was a refugee from Pakistan side when partition happened. And when he came to Kenya and he had to face the situation of living in a so-called multiracial society, and within that how he saw that in many, many circles there was the total invisibility of the black man to whom the country belonged actually, but how white supremacy functioned there and what was the role of the Asians there. So when we are talking about Black Lives Matter, it's relevant to see as to how Black Lives mattered even at that time within Africa itself, when there was colonialism and when there was this movement for freedom going on, but the blacks were being oppressed and exploited fully, and how these short stories in Landlust, for instance, and even the title actually is very pertinent, because this whole question of the lust for land, which actually created a certain kind of oppressive imperialistic projects, entrepreneurship that happened out there in terms of how to rule the blacks, how to civilize them, as it were. And in a most barbaric way, the exploitation was happening in the name of sophisticating them, in the name of civilizing them. So it's very interesting to see how, this writer is looking at these different contexts, social contexts, and has a story called Multiracial, for instance, and has a story called Jambo Rafiki, and a story called Zero, as it were, and of course a story by the name of Landlust also. Now, in all these stories, what he's doing is to basically portray how the so-called invisible black is trying to make himself a little visible while his presence is suppressed and is not being recognized at all. And if at all he is recognized, it is only to further exploit him. And so in this entire context of these short stories, the sensitization that I was talking about, which the writer can do, and James Baldwin in 1960s at that very time in America had written a letter from what he called a letter from a region in my mind. A very pertinent letter, a long letter that he wrote, which actually comes across as a sensitive document today, which the New Yorker published very recently. primarily to show as to how racism functioned there in such a way that this writer is talking about a particular region in one's mind that has come to be, which is to do with a totally different perspective to what life is all about, from the point of view of the black, who is totally marginalized and ghettoized and then laughed at, and all crime and everything is attributed to the black person. And similarly, in these short stories that I was talking about, it is really pertinent to see how the writer develops this idea of racism, the way it functions in colonial Kenya. So thank you, Yogi, for doing this book. And I would really recommend this book because we have to realize that not only is it a story of the black and the white, but somewhere it is also got to do with the kind of role that the Asians also played or play even today in terms of how they get racists when they are dealing with the blacks. So I think we have to rise up to the occasion and look at how Black Lives Matter. And Landlust is a collection of short stories that is also interrogating what the political movements like Black Lives Matter interrogate. They are also questioning that. Thank you.